I'm an addict named Ryan. I just want to thank you all for coming today and thank those of you that invited me to come out here to speak this evening. I just want to give a little disclaimer. Because of my anxiety and my learning disability, I will say quite often. That's my little filler when I'm nervous and I don't know what to say. And whenever I've listened to myself speak, I say quite often. So tonight, I'm going to share a story of travesty and triumph with you. In 30 minutes, I'll try to sum up my experience, strength, and hope, half of which will be my backstory, and the other half will be my experience with Narcotics Anonymous. So, not to put anybody on the spot, I don't need a raising of hands, but if you agree with what I have to say, I'd appreciate a little head nod. Give me a little Let me know that you understand what I'm talking about, because in my story of tragedy, some of you may be able to relate. So in my story, what I will share with you is I'm a child born of a mother who used drugs as she was pregnant. So if there's any women out there, even use Tylenol. Any drugs, alcohol, any form of any chemicals, I just wanted to share with you that I'm your poster child. But at the end of my story, before I'm done, you will understand the triumph that came from that and from my learning disability. So for me, as a small child, I grew up in Sacramento, California. I'm from a very big city. That's why coming all the way up here makes me more comfortable. When I see more diversity, I appreciate that more. It makes me feel more at home. And I really enjoy coming up here and being with you guys. So as a small child, I was a lot to handle. Still to this day, my mother will tell you that she had to use to deal with me because I was that intense. I was I had, and I'll explain, I had ADHD. So as a child, I was very hyperactive. And one of the only outlets that my mother had for me was art. So almost every day, that would be the only way that my mother could get me out of her hair, would be to draw. I remember many trips walking to the library for, because you could get books for free. So we'd walk and get art books, and I would draw. Not just pencil drawing, I would color pencils. I remember painting as a kid. My grandparents are painters. My mother is a graphite pencil portrait artist, which will make more sense to you when I tell you that at 13 years old, my mother went to prison. So because of my learning disability, at a young age, I don't feel like I fit in very well. I was not like other kids. I remember right about third grade, they started giving me, and I don't know why, I'm not a doctor, nor do I pretend to be. They started giving me Benadryl for my behavior in school, or instructed my parents to give me Benadryl. And I remember around third grade that I had trouble paying attention. And now it makes sense to me. Like using Benadryl and staring out the window, not being able to pay attention was part of the problem. So in third grade, they began with my testing for beginning special education, IEPs, all that stuff. ADHD was pretty new back in the 80s. So they didn't quite know what to do with kids like us, but definitely, I didn't feel a part of the other kids. Like I was not like other kids, and I didn't learn the same as them. And this is where my tragedy later in life turned to triumph, because I didn't learn like other kids. I couldn't sit there. I couldn't listen. I couldn't pay attention on the level they did. But as my story of tragedy to triumph unfolds in front of you in this 30 minutes, you'll see later in life how I use that to my advantage. So that's why when I share my story, if there's ever any women out there that use during their pregnancies, My mission is to give you a little sliver of hope. There's a lot of guilt that revolves around that with women, my mother in particular. But I try to tell my mother that now, what I have now and what I've done now, the only reason I can do it is because of that. So I learned different special education my whole life, which means, of course, other kids, they picked on me. School was miserable for me. I'd go into regular class with the normal kids, and then I'd go into other class, the special class, and I struggled with fitting in. And I've never really fit in with the norm. I never did. Like when I went to high school, I didn't dress the same as most of the other kids. I didn't act the same, and I still I'm not like the dude next door. I'm not going to make sure that I wear the same shoes as you. Like my hair ain't going to be cut the same as you. I've always been I got "fuck you" tattooed on the back of my head because that's I don't care what you do. Like I don't. Like I do what I want to do because I can. And so me, at 13 years old, I don't know if I'd experimented with anything yet. I started getting in a little bit of trouble. My mother was arrested when I was 13 years old, and my father was an addict and very abusive. So my mother's was my safe place. That's where I lived. I stayed with my mom, and unfortunately, I visited my mom in downtown Sacramento jail every weekend for at least a year. And as a small child, my hopes were that she didn't do it, because that's what she told me, right? She didn't say, "I didn't do it, don't worry." You know, that criminality piece in my own addict mother, that she wasn't going to admit to her child that she did anything. But unfortunately, because I was an ignorant small child, I hung on to those words from the matriarch of my family, and I was very disappointed. I remember my mother was sentenced to, I don't remember how many years it was, maybe 10 years in prison. California does some weird stuff with computing your time. So she maybe got over 10 years because she ended up doing 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 4. So you do a third, whatever. So she got a chunk, and it sounded scary as a 13-year-old. Like your mom's going to be gone for 12, 14 years. So I was definitely lost. My dad was a horrible, abusive addict, and he was absent and here and there. And he was my first experience with any type of meetings. I think we attended some type of Anon. As a kid, I remember being forced into some treatment he was at. And I at that time, right around there, I caught my first felony. So I've been a convicted felon since 1992. So I caught my first burglary charge at a very, very young age. And at that time began my incarceration and growing up in the juvenile detention system. That was my constant from 13 to 18 years old. That was the one place I could call home. That's the one place I fit in. I fit in because it was very diverse. It was home. It was a safe place. It had a bed and food and books and school. And everybody else seemed to be very similar to me. There was no upper class, lower class. Like we was just some kids from the streets. And we appreciated, dominoes and spades and basketball. And we had ping pong and we had camaraderie. And that's where I felt my first, I was at home, because I'd show up so often. Because number one, I was a runaway because my mother was in prison. There was no one to call to come pick me up first thing. So I stayed. I stayed when other kids would get in little trouble and then go home. I stayed because it was time for a group home. It was time for a relative. It was time for something. So around that time, I would get released, put in a relative's house. I would run away. I had a huge criminality piece that was going on. And a lot of it was because I was a hurt, angry child. I wasn't sure how to process my emotions yet. So at a very young age, like, I'm in the game. Like, I'm in those streets. Like, I'm carrying a gun. We're stealing cars. I ended up in youth authority at like 16 years old. So California Youth Authority is, for a kid, is nothing like this state. I'll tell you, it's a vicious, nasty place where you see things that are on TV, but they're real, and it's trauma. So around that time, maybe a little earlier, I started to learn how to tattoo. I started to learn to tattoo out of necessity. My mother was in prison. My cousins were in prison. My mom had a boyfriend. Of course, he was in prison. And I just figured I was going to go to prison. Like, I figured that's the way this was going to go. And I don't know if it was one of my friends' dads or somebody told me in the whole grand scheme of things, when we're using drugs and we're stealing cars and we're them street kids that are couch surfing, that told us, like, you're going to end up spending the rest of your life in prison, so you might as well get a good job. Like, what are you going to do in prison? So I was like, I'm a tattoo. That's what I'm going to do. So, at a really young age, I was tattooing. And people in my neighborhood, like, they normally just refer to me as Tattoo Ryan. Because at 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, everybody in my neighborhood, they just came over and got tattoos from me. I've tattooed my mother. I've tattooed uncles, aunts, friends, cousins. Like, everybody in the neighborhood would be, I would tattoo them. So I and my addiction, I felt that certain chemicals made me feel at home, or made me feel outgoing. Like, I was a quiet person. I could talk. Didn't matter what chemical I put in my body. As soon as I relieved myself of my normality, I felt like I came out of my shell. I felt like I could draw better. I could tattoo better. I could talk better. I could walk better. I could do everything better. And that was that, and there began the problem. I didn't see that the drug use was the problem, to be honest with you. I thought my criminality was the problem. So I remember catching a case, I think I was like 18, 19, 96. And they gave me like 9 months in jail. And for your first offense, that was pretty severe. But the judge had told me, like, I can't use your juvenile record against you, but I can see it. So the moment you try to tell me that this is the first time you ever did this, like, I'm not believing you. I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to give you the most time I can give you for your first offense. And if I ever see you here again, for sure you're going to state prison. In that time, I got my GED, and I kind of made a vow to myself that I was going to stop doing crime. But I didn't make a vow to myself to stop using drugs. Just not doing crime. So that's when I started to justify the ends to the means. Then my ego and my entitlement as a man grew, because I was no longer a boy anymore. So now I think I'm a man, and I can do what I want, because I'm not going to do crimes. I'll have a job. So if I have a job and I pay and I have a house and I have a car, I have a do what I want pass. So I can do whatever I want. You're not going to tell me on the weekends that I can't get high. Unfortunately, for me, just getting high on the weekends didn't work out so well. Right. And I'm the kind of addict that will I'm like a fashion addict. You remember when you used to wear baggy pants, and then you wore different kind of pants, and now you wear joggers, and then you wear shorts, and you wear different kind of clothes? I would change up my addiction many times to justify that I did not have a problem. I remember thinking I'm clean because I wouldn't do one chemical because I'd switch to another chemical for the next year. And I would think that way, like, I'm not doing it this way, so I'm clean. I'm doing great because I'm doing this. And I remember at some point, and I don't know if any of you understand what synergy is. So some of you may, and some don't. So those of you that don't, synergy is a weird math equation in an addict. So synergy is if you give one chemical a value of 2, and another different chemical, a value of 2. When you use those 2 chemicals together, 2 plus 2 is actually 5, not 4. So this addict became the sickest when I started combining multiple chemicals in my body. And for me, there was times that I got up, and I don't know if I had a false back pain, if I had a false toothache, if I didn't hurt my knee, but my brain told me that I did. Every day when I woke up, something hurt. I never knew whether I was coming down from this, hungover from that. I was way too young to be in that kind of pain, but my brain told me I was in that pain. That I'm 25 years old, and man, my back's just tore up. Better go to the doctor. Or man, I'm thinking that if I call 911 and go by the ambulance, they'll really give me some good drugs. And I did. And maybe it's because I didn't have a ride. I don't know. I just was like, this is great. I would abuse those things. And every day I woke up and I never knew what was hurting and why. And I remember in prison, we took a pharmacology class. And the counselor asked for some of us to raise their hands for anyone who was a user or addicted to benzodiazepines. And after learning what that word was and what it was, I raised my hand and they asked me, can you explain to the rest of the class what it feels like to detox from benzos? I said, no, I can't. No, really? I can't. And they were like, really? But it's so bad. I was that sick. I was that sick one way or the other that I couldn't tell the difference between it being that, being something else, being the other thing, or the third thing. I just woke up in a bad place every day. And where I've had different bouts, like I said, so my addiction went from every weekend. And then it became every Friday, every payday. Every Friday. And then Friday would last, I'd make sure it lasted me all the way until, Monday. Because I was being responsible. I was going to make sure that I could pass a UA in the middle of the week. And it became more and more and more. And my behaviors became worse. I was a very functioning addict. I've done some very cool work in my life. But in retrospect, looking back now, I know that there's no way that those individuals that I worked with that worked with me since I was 19, 20 years old, at 30 years old, 32 years old, didn't know right when I drug my ass in at 6 o'clock in the morning with Lokes on, that I was not doing well. And I know it probably broke their heart, and they tried their best to send me to counseling. They didn't know what was wrong with me, but it's because I would never admit that I had a problem. I wouldn't. I come from the streets. I come from a place where I'm not admitting nothing to you. I'll ride it to the grave. I would flush my own dope just to tell myself that I didn't have a problem, and then walk away and then go buy some more dope tomorrow. But not today. Today I'm not a dope fiend. Dope fiends don't flush their dope. And it comes from being a street kid and being around other kids in prison. And it has to do with being macho. And, we do a lot of things like that just to show off. When, man, if I'm buying dope in 2 days, what was the difference? I should have just saved the dope. So for me, my addiction progressed to every day. Every day in one way, shape, or form. Every day in one chemical or another. My first experience with Narcotics Anonymous was my across the street neighbor lived with her grandmother at my grandma's house. And I remember asking her, where's your mother? Why don't you live with your parents? And she said, my mother uses drugs, so I live with my grandparents. And I thought, but I know your mom. She's pretty cool. And she goes, no, she don't use drugs no more, but she did. And now she's clean. So now I live with my grandparents. And I was like, okay. So her name is Barb. And my first experience with a Narcotics Anonymous convention in Northern California. I got to go see Barb, and she celebrated, I think, 42 years clean today. So at that convention, I got to see two women when I was a child that I knew that had remained clean my whole life, which is very cool. So that was my first experience with Narcotics Anonymous. And I want you to know, I didn't get recovery in Sacramento. They tried. I did have other members that would come to my house. I've had a basic text bought for me. I remember some other members would come by and I remember this guy named Ryan, same name as me, had said, oh man, he tried to trick me into reading the book. He said, page 82 back there, man, it really reminds me of you. You should read that. And I was like, man, shut up, man. I ain't reading that. He was like, you should come to this dance. I said, man, I ain't dancing, man. Shut up. Get out of here. And they tried, right? They tried. Unfortunately, I was the addict who never got my stuff together. And I would show up to your house, friends in high school. I'll still stop by, doing real bad. And I'm sure many wives and husbands were like, who is that dude? That's your friend? Man, you got to let that go because he's not. And so for me, 2011, I was strung out, just got removed from Super 8 for having 20 guests in a night and stealing the garbage can and a pillow, they said. And I moved over to Motel 6 on Madison Avenue and I-80. So I'm in Motel 6 and I'm slanging ink for cigarettes, liquor, dope. I didn't care. $20 gas money. And I was miserable. But I knew that there was something here in Oregon. I had a little job opportunity. Scraped up some money. Took a $29.99 in-town U-Haul and peeled out to Oregon in it. I ran out of dope. I fell asleep in a rest stop somewhere near, I don't know, around Redding. Slept, woke up. Used all the rest of the dope I had. I still wasn't high. And I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired. I threw all my stuff out the window, and I never used since. So for me, we'll fast forward to being a bad student, special education, mother who used while she was pregnant. My learning disability, now that I'm clean, because I'm not fogged by those chemicals, is something I can use as an attribute. So when I choose to learn, am an exceptional student. Yes. I am an exceptional artist. I'm an exceptional tattoo artist because I can hyper-focus on what I'm doing and tune out the entire world like a normie cannot. So my mother's tragedy need not have guilt because that triumph for me is the advantage I have on other people. I graduated first in my class at tattoo school. I was done before anyone. I graduated before anyone. Yeah, I had a jump on them. I mean, I tattooed for 20-something years before that. But not the book stuff, because that's what I was scared of. I was scared of the book stuff. I was scared of, I had to write college papers. I never wrote no college paper. I never stood in front of the class and made no oral report. Never. I wouldn't show up to school that day. I would go tell my special education teacher that I can't. And I wouldn't have to. I got an IEP. I don't got to speak in front of the class. So to come up here and speak with you guys, this is growth. And if it wasn't for Narcotics Anonymous and being clean, I wouldn't have any of that. I wouldn't. There's no way. I own a tattoo shop. I couldn't do that if I wasn't clean. There's no way. I could not manage my own business. I would blow that spot up. It would be on the news in 33 days. And then I would be off to prison again and have some stupid cool story for every other stupid ass in prison with me about how back in the days I had a tattoo shop. For me, Narcotics Anonymous is the only reason I'm still here, because I'm a legit piece of shit. I am. I'm not a nice person when I'm using, but I'm completely different. Like it took me 35 years to figure this out. I don't expect anybody not to have to go through every lump and bump and fall over on your face before you, and that's your journey to get here. It took this to get mine, and I'm glad that I made it through alive, and it's a miracle. So before I'm done, one thing that I am going to share with you about Narcotics Anonymous literature. So some of us, we work steps to work on ourselves, right? That's what we do for self-improvement. We work on traditions so that we can better interact with other members. And I'm going to tell you in my 12 years clean, the most difficult part of Narcotics Anonymous is the other members and mitigating those relationships. Because this literature probably won't change. It's not changed much. I happen to be a literature nerd, so we could talk that another time. But this literature has not changed much over the years, but the members will change. Like this room in 20 years, how many will be here? I don't know. So I really, whenever you hear anyone speak about traditions, I want you to remember that the first tradition is first for a reason. As soon as you start arguing over traditions, remember tradition one. Because if in your argument, your intention is not unity, then you need to reel it back in and check your motives. Because the first tradition is about unity for one reason. To make sure that whatever we're doing in life, in Narcotics Anonymous, that we are thinking of unity, not anything else. Like if you don't have unity, then you can't argue over, the fourth tradition and being autonomous and that my group can do this and because it says this, like really, because cool, but is all that arguing, does that feel like unity to you? Because if it doesn't, man, maybe you should jump back to the first tradition real quick before you worry about the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh. I just want to thank you all very much for listening to me jabber and having me and inviting me out. And that's all I have.